London, 1851. Miss Penelope Clarke pressed her back against the wall of the grand ballroom, willing herself to disappear into the ornate wallpaper. She clutched her modest notebook tightly to her chest, her eyes scanning the glittering assemblage for her young charge. Lady Amelia Fairchild, only 12 years old, was supposed to be observing proper society behavior from the sidelines, not flitting about like a butterfly among the dancers. "Amelia," Penelope whispered under her breath, "where have you gone now?" The Fairchild family's annual winter ball was in full splendor. Crystal chandeliers cast diamond-like reflections across the marble floor where the nobility of England twirled in perfect rhythm. Ladies in silk gowns floated like colorful clouds around gentlemen in impeccable evening dress. The music swelled from the orchestra, nearly drowning out the constant hum of gossip and laughter. Penelope's fingers tightened around her pencil. She had been instructed by Lady Fairchild to note any improper behavior from Amelia, a task made impossible by the child's disappearance. 3 months as governess in the Fairchild household had taught Penelope that invisibility was her expected state. The servants ignored her because she wasn't quite one of them, the family tolerated her because she wasn't truly a guest. She existed in the shadows of grand rooms, neither servant nor nobility, but something uncomfortably in between. No one sees a governess, she reminded herself. It was safer that way. After what happened in Brighton 2 years ago, anonymity was her shield and her salvation. Just then, she spotted Amelia's golden curls bobbing near the refreshment table, dangerously close to a punch bowl. "Excuse me," Penelope murmured as she slipped through the crowd, careful not to brush against the fine fabrics of the elite. No one moved aside for her, no one acknowledged her urgent "pardon me" as she navigated the human labyrinth. As she reached the refreshment table, a deep voice spoke from directly behind her. "You move through a ballroom like someone avoiding detection, miss." Penelope froze, then slowly turned to face the inquiry. Her breath caught in her throat. Standing before her was the Marquess of Falkirk, Owen Falkirk himself. His tall frame was imposing in perfectly tailored evening clothes, his dark hair swept back from a face that had graced many a gossip column. Most striking were his eyes, sharp, observant, and currently fixed on her with uncomfortable intensity. "Clarke," she said quietly. "Miss Clarke. I am Lady Amelia's governess." His eyebrow lifted slightly. "Ah. The mysterious Miss Clarke. My goddaughter speaks of you often in her letters." Penelope felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I should return to my duties, my lord." She cursed herself for the tremor in her voice. "Your duty at present seems to be lurking in corners and observing the proceedings with a rather critical eye." His tone held amusement rather than accusation. "What do you record in that little book, I wonder?" "Merely notes on proper decorum for Lady Amelia's education," Penelope replied, clutching the notebook more tightly. "Then you must be a scholar of considerable dedication. I've watched you for nearly an hour, and your observations never cease." The revelation that he had noticed her, had been watching her, sent a jolt of alarm through Penelope's body. She had cultivated invisibility with careful precision. Being seen by someone of his consequence was dangerous. "You mistake me, my lord. I am merely doing as Lady Fairchild instructed." The Marquis smiled, a slight curve of his lips that transformed his serious countenance. "Then perhaps Lady Fairchild would permit me to instruct you in something else." He extended his hand. "The next set is beginning. Would you honor me with this dance?" The question struck Penelope like a physical blow. Around them, conversations faltered. She sensed rather than saw the curious glances, the raised eyebrows, the quick exchange of whispers behind fans. "My lord, I cannot. It would be inappropriate. I'm employed by the family." "Nonsense. I am not your employer, merely a family friend. His hand remained extended, patient and unwavering. One dance, Miss Clarke. Surely that is not too scandalous. But it was. It was scandalous enough that she could lose her position, the position that had saved her from complete ruin after Brighton. More importantly, it threatened to tear away the protective shroud of anonymity she had wrapped around herself. Yet as the opening notes of the waltz filled the air, Penelope found her hand moving of its own accord, reaching toward his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. I warn you, she said, barely audible over the music, I have not danced in years. Then I shall lead with extra care. And suddenly she was among the swirling couples, a plain brown sparrow among peacocks and swans. The Marquess guided her with confident steps, his hand at her waist providing gentle pressure to direct her movements. You dance beautifully for someone so out of practice, he observed after a few turns. Almost as if your body remembers what your mind wishes to forget. Penelope's step faltered, but he smoothly compensated. You are too kind, my lord. Owen, he said. When we are dancing, I think you might call me Owen. That would be most improper. His smile deepened. I find that propriety, while valuable in its place, can be terribly restrictive. Don't you agree? Propriety protects us, Penelope countered, her voice low. It provides structure and safety. Does it? Or does it merely cage us in roles we may not be suited for? The conversation unsettled her nearly as much as his gaze, which never left her face as they moved across the floor. She was acutely aware of how her faded blue dress, her best, but still woefully simple, contrasted with the jewel-toned silks and satins around her. Why did you ask me to dance? She finally asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Because you looked like you needed to be seen. The words struck at something deep within her, a truth she had buried beneath layers of careful discipline and restraint. She had convinced herself that invisibility was a comfort, when in reality it was a prison of her own making. As the music drew to a close, the Marquess guided her to the edge of the dance floor. Thank you, Miss Clarke, he said formally, bowing over her hand. You have made this tedious social obligation considerably more interesting. I thank you, my lord. She curtsied awkwardly, feeling dozens of eyes on her back. I hope we might speak again. Perhaps tomorrow in the gardens? Lady Amelia mentioned you often walk with her before breakfast. Before Penelope could formulate a response, Lady Fairchild appeared at her elbow, face tight with barely controlled displeasure. Lord Falkirk, how delightful to see you engaging with our staff, she said, her voice laden with frost. Miss Clarke, I believe Amelia requires your attention upstairs. Immediately. Yes, my lady. Penelope dipped into a curse, her eyes downcast. Good evening, Lord Falkirk. As she hurried away, she felt the weight of his gaze following her out of the ballroom. Something had shifted in her carefully constructed world, something that filled her with equal parts terror and exhilaration. That night, after putting Amelia to bed, Penelope received a terse summons to Lady Fairchild's private sitting room. The Countess sat rigidly on a settee, her elaborate evening gown exchanged for a silk dressing gown. Miss Clarke, when we engaged your services, despite the circumstances of your previous employment, we made our expectations clear. Yes, my lady. Penelope stood with hands clasped before her, the perfect picture of contrition. Then perhaps you can explain why you thought it appropriate to dance with the Marquess of Falkirk in full view of London society. Lady Fairchild's voice remained calm, which somehow made her displeasure more cutting than if she had shouted. I did not think it appropriate, my lady. I tried to decline, but you accepted nonetheless. Lady Fairchild sighed heavily. Do you know what people will say? That we employ a governess who seeks to rise above her station. That we cannot control our own household staff. I apologize most sincerely. It will not happen again. Lady Fairchild studied her for a long moment. No, it will not. I have considered dismissing you, but Amelia has grown attached, and good governesses are difficult to find. She rose, signaling the end of the interview. You will restrict your interactions with guests to the absolute minimum required by politeness. You will not attend any further social functions in this house. And you will certainly not engage in any further familiarity with Lord Falkirk. Of course, my lady. Relief washed through Penelope. Her position was secure, at least for now. You may go. Penelope returned to her small room in the east wing, far from the family chambers. As she removed the pins from her hair, she caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser. Plain features looked back at her, brown hair, brown eyes, nothing remarkable. Nothing to attract the attention of a marquis. Yet he had seen her. Had watched her. Had asked her to dance. She shook her head firmly, dismissing the dangerous thoughts. Love and station are inextricably linked, she whispered to her reflection, repeating the hard lesson she had learned in Brighton. A woman who forgets her place loses everything. The morning dawned crisp and clear, frost patterns decorating the windows of the Fairchild townhouse. Penelope woke with the first light, as was her habit, and dressed in her sensible brown walking dress. Amelia would be eager for their morning constitutional in the gardens, especially after the excitement of the ball. She had barely finished pinning her hair when a knock came at her door. A maid stood outside, her expression pinched with disapproval. "This came for you," she said, thrusting forward a small envelope. "Hand-delivered this morning." Penelope took the envelope with a murmured thank you. The maid lingered, clearly hoping to discover its contents, but Penelope closed the door firmly before examining the unexpected correspondence. Her name was written in a bold, masculine hand across the front. Breaking the seal, she withdrew a single sheet of paper. "Miss Clarke, I find myself with a matter of some delicacy to discuss regarding my goddaughter's education. Would you oblige me with a few moments of conversation in the West Garden at 7:30? I shall wait by the stone bench near the fountain. Your servant." Oh, Falkirk. Penelope's hands trembled as she reread the note. Lady Fairchild's instructions had been explicit, no further familiarity with Lord Falkirk. Yet if he truly wished to discuss Amelia's education, refusing would be both disrespectful and potentially harmful to her charge. After several minutes of internal debate, she tucked the note into her pocket and went to collect Amelia for their walk. Perhaps they could circle through the West Garden. If they happened to encounter the Marquis, it would be mere coincidence, not a deliberate meeting. Amelia chattered happily about the ball as they descended the stairs. "And did you see Lady Harrington's daughter? Mamma says her dress was vulgar, but I thought it was beautiful. And the Duchess of Pembroke brought her new baby. He was upstairs with the nurse, but I sneaked away to see him." "So that's where you disappeared to," Penelope said, relieved to have the mystery solved. "You know you're not to wander off without telling me. But Miss Clarke, you were dancing with Uncle Owen." Amelia's eye sparkled with mischief. "I didn't want to interrupt." Penelope felt heat rush to her face. "That was a momentary lapse in judgment on both our parts. And he is not truly your uncle, merely your godfather. He's the best godfather. He brings me presents from his travels and never tells me I must act like a proper lady." Amelia skipped ahead as they exited into the garden. "Can we go see the fountain? I want to make a wish." Penelope hesitated, then nodded. "For a brief visit." They rounded the hedge that separated the formal gardens from the fountain area. Sure enough, the Marquis was seated on the stone bench, his tall figure unmistakable even from a distance. He rose as they approached, and Penelope's heart gave an unexpected flutter. "Uncle Owen!" Amelia rushed forward, propriety forgotten in her excitement. "Lady Amelia." He bowed formally, then broke into a warm smile as he straightened. "You grow more lovely each time I see you. Did you bring me anything from your travels?" Amelia asked hopefully. "Amelia!" "That is terribly rude," Penelope admonished, finally catching up to her charge. The Marquis laughed. "It would be rude if I had not, in fact, brought something." He reached into his coat and produced a small package wrapped in tissue. "From Venice. A glass butterfly for your collection." Amelia squealed with delight as she unwrapped the delicate figurine, its blue glass wings catching the morning light. "It's beautiful." "Thank you, Uncle Owen." "You're welcome, little one." His eyes shifted to Penelope. "Good morning, Miss Clarke. I'm pleased you received my note." Yes, my lord. Though I should mention that Lady Fairchild has specifically instructed Amelia," he interrupted smoothly, "would you do me a great favor? I believe Mrs. Hopkins in the kitchen was preparing some special pastries this morning. Would you ask her if they're ready yet? Tell her they're for your godfather." Amelia looked between them, her young face surprisingly knowing. "Of course. I'll be very slow about it." She skipped off toward the house, clutching her glass butterfly. When she had gone, the Marquis gestured to the bench. "Please, sit. This won't take long." Penelope reluctantly perched on the edge of the stone seat, maintaining as much distance between them as propriety allowed. "My lord, I must be direct. I've been instructed to avoid any further interaction with you." "Yes, I rather thought that might happen." He didn't seem troubled by the information. "Lady Fairchild has always been diligent about maintaining appropriate boundaries." "Then why? Because appropriate boundaries are not always correct ones." He turned to face her fully. "Miss Clarke, I must confess I didn't ask you here to discuss Amelia's education. That was merely a pretext." Alarm raced through Penelope's veins. "Then I must return to the house immediately." "Before you do, answer me one question." His voice held no command, only a quiet intensity that held her in place more effectively than any order. "What happened in Brighton?" Penelope felt the blood drain from her face. I don't know what you mean." "I think you do. You see, I make it a point to know something of the people who care for my goddaughter. Your references were impeccable, except for the curious gap of nearly 6 months between your position with the Harrington family and your arrival here." Her hands twisted in her lap. "You've been investigating me." "Making inquiries," he corrected gently. "There are rumors, Miss Clarke. Whispers about a governess involved in a scandal with the Harringtons' eldest son." Shame burned through her like fire. "Then you know everything," she whispered. "Why bring it up now? Do you intend to expose me to the Fairchilds?" "Quite the opposite." He leaned forward slightly. "I believe you were wronged in that situation." Penelope's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I know Thomas Harrington. We were at school together." A shadow crossed his face. He has a pattern of pursuing vulnerable women, then claiming they seduced him when it becomes inconvenient. Tears pricked at the corners of Penelope's eyes. "No one believed me. They all thought I was trying to trap him into marriage. That I deliberately," she broke off, unable to continue. "I believe you," he said simply. And I think it's time someone stood up for you. Hope and fear warred within her chest. Why would you do that? You don't know me. I would like to. His voice softened. Last night, watching you at the ball, so careful, so contained, yet so keenly observant, I found myself intrigued. When we danced, that intrigue deepened to genuine interest. My Lord Owen, he insisted. Please. Penelope shook her head. This isn't proper. Whatever you believe about Brighton, the fact remains that I am a governess and you are a marquis. There can be no friendship between us. Can't there? He smiled slightly. I've never been overly concerned with what society deems proper. I care far more about what is right, what is true. Before she could respond, the sound of hurried footsteps announced Amelia's return. The girl appeared around the hedge, looking distressed. Miss Clarke. Mamma is looking for you everywhere. She's very cross about something in the morning paper. Penelope stood immediately, dread settling in her stomach. Thank you, Amelia. We should return at once. She turned to the Marquis with a curtsy. Good day, Lord Falkirk. His expression had grown serious. This isn't finished, Miss Clarke. As she hurried back to the house, Penelope knew with terrible certainty that her past had finally caught up with her. Lady Fairchild was waiting in the morning room, her face like stone. On the table before her lay a copy of the Morning Post, folded open to the society pages. She did not invite Penelope to sit. Can you explain this? Lady Fairchild pushed the paper toward her. Penelope took it with trembling hands and read the paragraph that had been circled in angry ink. Lord F. caused quite a stir at the Fairchild ball when he favoured the family's governess with a waltz. The lady in question, a Miss C., was previously employed by the Harrington family but departed under mysterious circumstances. One wonders if Lord F. is aware of the rumours surrounding her hasty exit from Brighton society. Perhaps he finds scandal as attractive as her modest charms. I don't understand. How did they do not insult my intelligence by pretending ignorance? Lady Fairchild snapped. This item places our family at the centre of gossip. Worse, it connects us to whatever disgrace follows you from Brighton. My lady, I swear I did not seek Lord Falkirk's attention. It matters not what you sought. The damage is done. Lady Fairchild rose, her posture rigid with anger. I cannot have a governess whose name appears in gossip columns. You will pack your things and be gone by noon. Please, Penelope whispered, panic rising in her throat. Where will I go? Without a reference, you should have considered that before you drew attention to yourself. Lady Fairchild's voice held no compassion. You'll be paid through the month. That is more generosity than many would show. Dismissed, Penelope stumbled back to her room, the newspaper still clutched in her hand. With mechanical movements, she began to pack her meagre belongings. Tears blurred her vision as she folded her dresses and stacked her books. 3 months of careful rebuilding, shattered by one dance. One moment of weakness. A soft knock interrupted her packing. She opened the door to find Amelia, her young face streaked with tears. Is it true? Are you leaving us? Penelope knelt to embrace the girl. I'm afraid I must, dearest. Your mother has decided it's for the best. Because you danced with Uncle Owen? That's not fair. Life is rarely fair, Amelia. Penelope smoothed the child's golden curls. But we must accept its challenges with grace. Promise me you'll continue your studies diligently. Amelia nodded solemnly. I promise. But where will you go? The question Penelope had been avoiding crashed over her with renewed force. Without references, without family, with the shadow of scandal once again hanging over her name, what options remained? I shall find another position, she lied with a confident smile. Perhaps in a school, or with another family outside London. I'll miss you terribly. Amelia threw her arms around Penelope's neck. And I you, my dear one. An hour later, Penelope stood on the front step of the Fairchild townhouse, her trunk at her feet, a small valise in her hand. She had just enough money for a few nights at a modest boarding house while she frantically wrote to agencies and former acquaintances. As she was about to signal for a hackney, a familiar carriage pulled up to the curb. The Marquess of Falkirk himself stepped out, his expression grim as he took in her luggage. "So it's as I feared," he said, approaching her. "Lady Fairchild has dismissed you." Penelope's chin lifted proudly despite her circumstances. "Yes. It seems our dance has consequences beyond a simple waltz. I saw the item in the post this morning. I came immediately, but it appears I'm too late to prevent your dismissal. There is nothing you could have done, my lord. The damage to the Fairchild reputation, damn the Fairchild reputation," he interrupted, surprising her with his vehemence. "And damn anyone who would judge you based on malicious gossip." His anger on her behalf warmed something inside her that had been cold for a very long time. Still, practicality reasserted itself quickly. "Your concern is appreciated, but I must secure lodgings before nightfall. I have a proposition for you." He glanced at the Fairchild house, then back to her. "Not here. Will you allow me to drive you somewhere we can speak privately? I give you my word as a gentleman that your reputation will suffer no further harm." Every instinct warned against accepting, yet Penelope found herself nodding. What more could she lose? The footman loaded her trunk onto the carriage, and the Marquis himself handed her inside. As the carriage pulled away from the curb, Penelope realized she was crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. Whatever the Marquis proposed, her life was irrevocably changing course. They rode in silence through London's busy streets, eventually turning into a quieter residential area. The carriage stopped before an elegant townhouse with a discreet brass plaque beside the door. "My mother's residence," the Marquis explained as he helped her down. "She is currently at our country estate, but maintains this house for her visits to town. The staff is minimal but loyal." The housekeeper who greeted them was elderly but sharp-eyed, clearly curious about Penelope but too well-trained to show it. They were shown to a small parlor where tea awaited. Only when they were seated, with tea poured and the door firmly closed, did the Marquis speak. "Miss Clarke, Penelope, if I may, I find myself in a position to offer you a solution to your current difficulties." She raised her cup to her lips, grateful for something to occupy her trembling hands. "I'm listening." "I require a governess for my ward." Penelope's cup clattered against its saucer. "Your ward? I was not aware you had one." "Few people are. Eleanor is my cousin's daughter. Her parents died in India 3 years ago, and she has been living at my country estate with tutors and a succession of governesses, none of whom have managed to connect with her." He leaned forward. "She is 12 years old, Amelia's age, but considerably more spirited. And you think I might succeed where others have failed? I've observed how you handle Amelia, with firmness, but also genuine warmth. Eleanor needs that balance desperately." He set down his cup. The position would come with generous compensation, private rooms at Falkirk Manor, and my complete support. Penelope studied him, searching for some hidden motive. "Why would you do this for me? A woman you barely know, with a questionable past." "Because I believe in second chances," he said simply. And because I find you remarkable." The word hung in the air between them, laden with meaning she dared not interpret. "What of society's opinion?" she asked finally. "If I become your employee after that item in the Post, the rumors will only intensify." "Let them." His jaw set stubbornly. Falkirk Manor is far enough from London that gossip rarely penetrates its walls. By the time the season ends, some new scandal will have replaced ours. Ours. The word sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. "If I accept," she said carefully, "there must be clear boundaries. I cannot, will not, risk another scandal." "Of course." He nodded, though something like disappointment flickered across his face. "You would be my employee, nothing more." Penelope knew she should refuse. Working in his household would place her in his orbit daily, a dangerous temptation for a heart already beginning to soften toward him. Yet the alternative was destitution, or perhaps a position in some remote household where she would be treated as little more than a servant. "I accept," she said finally. "On a trial basis. If after 1 month either of us feels the arrangement is unsuitable, we part ways with no ill feeling." Relief washed over his face. "Agreed. We can leave for Falkirk Manor tomorrow morning, if that suits you." "So soon?" "Eleanor has been without proper guidance for too long already." He rose. "You'll stay here tonight as my mother's guest. The housekeeper will show you to a room shortly." As he moved toward the door, Penelope called after him, "My Lord, Owen, thank you." He turned back, his expression softening. "Don't thank me yet, Miss Clarke. Wait until you've met Eleanor." The journey to Falkirk Manor took nearly a full day, winding through increasingly rural landscapes until they reached Derbyshire. Penelope spent most of the journey alternating between anxiety about her new position and awareness of the Marquess seated across from her. He had brought work with him, correspondence and estate papers, but occasionally caught her watching him and would smile in a way that made her heart flutter traitorously. As the carriage crested a hill in the late afternoon, Falkirk Manor came into view. Penelope could not suppress a gasp of wonder. The house was magnificent, Elizabethan in its bones but with Georgian additions, set among rolling parkland with gardens falling away toward a lake that gleamed in the setting sun. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "It can be rather imposing at first," Owen admitted, watching her reaction with evident pleasure. "But I hope you'll come to see it as home." Home. The word resonated within her. She had not had a true home since her parents died when she was 16. Just a succession of other people's houses where she existed on the margins. The carriage pulled up to the grand entrance, where a line of servants waited to greet their master. As Owen handed her down, Penelope felt the curious gazes of the staff assessing her plain traveling dress and modest luggage. "Mrs. Winters, this is Miss Clarke, Eleanor's new governess," Owen addressed a severe-looking older woman who was clearly the housekeeper. "Please see that she's comfortable in the blue room in the east wing." "The blue room, my lord?" Mrs. Winters couldn't quite hide her surprise. "That's in the family wing." "Yes, I'm aware of its location in the house I've lived in all my life," he replied dryly. "Miss Clarke will take her meals with Eleanor but is welcome to join me in the library in the evenings if she wishes." Penelope felt the weight of the staff's collective gaze. This was not how governesses were typically treated, not relegated to remote bedrooms or meals in the nursery, but placed in a guest room and invited to the master's company. Already she could sense the seeds of gossip taking root. "My lord, perhaps it would be more appropriate if I—" "Miss Clarke," he interrupted firmly, "you'll find I run my household according to my own preferences, not convention. You're here to help a troubled child, and I intend to make that task as comfortable as possible." With that declaration, he turned to the butler to inquire about estate matters, effectively ending the discussion. Mrs. Winters led Penelope upstairs, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. "You should know, Miss Clarke, that Lord Falkirk is highly respected by his staff and tenants. We are protective of his reputation." The implication was clear: do not take advantage of his kindness. Do not bring scandal to this house. "I assure you, Mrs. Winters, I am here solely as Miss Eleanor's governess," Penelope replied evenly. "Lord Falkirk has been generous in offering me this position, and I intend to repay that generosity with absolute professionalism." The housekeeper seemed somewhat mollified. "Very good. You'll meet Miss Eleanor at dinner. I should warn you, she has driven away 3 governesses already. So I understand. She can be difficult." Mrs. Winters paused outside a blue-papered bedroom. "This will be your room. Miss Eleanor's adjoins through that connecting door. The bell pull summons a maid if you require assistance." Left alone, Penelope surveyed her new accommodation with wonder. The room was larger than any she had occupied since her parents' home, beautifully appointed with mahogany furniture and blue silk hangings. A fire crackled in the grate, warming the spring chill from the air. She crossed to the window and gazed out at the formal gardens below. Somewhere in this grand house was a child who had lost her parents, who had driven away multiple governesses, and who now awaited Penelope with likely hostility. Beyond that challenge lay an even greater one, maintaining proper distance from Owen Falkirk when every interaction drew her further into his orbit. "You know the rules," she whispered to her reflection in the window pane. "Love cannot cross the boundaries of class. Remember Brighton. Remember the cost of forgetting your place." Her reflection stared back, uncertain and afraid, as the sun slipped behind the distant hills. Dinner that evening was served in a small private dining room rather than the grand formal one. Penelope, dressed in her best gown, still woefully plain compared to the splendor of the house, was escorted in by a footman to find Owen already present with a small figure beside him. Eleanor Falkirk was a slight girl with auburn hair pulled back in a severe braid. Her face might have been pretty had it not been set in such a determined scowl. She wore a simple muslin dress that appeared to have been deliberately crumpled, and a ribbon hung untied around her collar. "Ah, Miss Clarke." Owen rose politely. "May I present my ward, Miss Eleanor Falkirk? Eleanor, this is Miss Clarke, your new governess." Eleanor's gaze swept over Penelope with the critical assessment of a general surveying enemy troops. "How long will you stay?" "Miss Hathaway lasted 3 weeks. Miss Pembroke only 2. "Eleanor," Owen admonished, but Penelope raised a hand to stop him. "A fair question," she said calmly, taking her seat. "I intend to stay as long as you require proper education and guidance. Whether that is pleasant or unpleasant for either of us remains to be seen." Eleanor blinked, clearly not expecting such directness. "Cousin Owen says you were dismissed from your last position for dancing with him." Penelope nearly choked on the water she had just sipped. She shot Owen an accusatory glance, which he met with an apologetic shrug. "I believe in honesty with Eleanor," he explained. "She has had enough deception in her life." Penelope turned back to the girl. "Yes, that is partially true. Society has very strict rules about governesses and their behavior. When Lord Falkirk asked me to dance, I should have declined more firmly." "Why?" Eleanor demanded. "If you wanted to dance, and he wanted to dance with you, why should anyone else care?" "An excellent question," Owen murmured. Penelope ignored him. "Because, Miss Eleanor, the world is governed by systems of behavior that maintain order. When we step outside those systems, there are consequences." "That's stupid," Eleanor declared flatly. "Perhaps, Penelope conceded, surprising both her companions. But it is reality, and we must navigate it as best we can. Now, shall we discuss your studies? Lord Falkirk tells me your previous governesses have found you challenging. The evening proceeded with relative calm, though Eleanor tested boundaries constantly, using improper language, deliberately spilling her water, contradicting nearly everything Penelope said. Through it all, Penelope maintained a serene composure that seemed to both frustrate and intrigue the child. When dinner concluded, Owen suggested Eleanor show Penelope the schoolroom where they would begin lessons the following day. "Must I?" Eleanor sighed dramatically. "Yes," Owen replied firmly. "And you will do so with courtesy." With evident reluctance, Eleanor led Penelope up a flight of stairs to a bright corner room overlooking the gardens. Despite the girls' obvious resistance to education, the schoolroom was well equipped with books, maps, and scientific instruments. "Your cousin has provided excellent resources," Penelope observed, examining a particularly fine celestial globe. "He's always buying things," Eleanor said with a shrug. "Books and globes and microscopes. As if objects could make me want to learn." Penelope turned to study the girl more carefully. "What would make you want to learn, Eleanor?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She twirled a loose strand of hair around her finger, suddenly looking very young. "No one's asked me that before." "I'm asking now." Eleanor was silent for a long moment. "I want to know about real things. Not just dates and figures in books. I want to know how people live in different places, how animals behave in the wild, how to survive if you're all alone." The vulnerability in her voice struck Penelope to the core. This wasn't merely a difficult child, this was a girl who had lost her parents and been shipped across the world to live with a cousin she barely knew. "Then that's where we'll begin," Penelope said softly. "With real things." Eleanor looked up, suspicion warring with hope in her eyes. "You're just saying that. Tomorrow you'll make me conjugate French verbs and practice scales on the pianoforte like all the others." "We will certainly study French and music," Penelope agreed. "But perhaps we'll start with natural philosophy, the study of the world around us. I noticed a fine collection of specimens in the cabinet there." A flicker of genuine interest crossed Eleanor's face before she suppressed it. "Cousin Owen collected them. From his travels. Has he taken you on any expeditions around the estate? There must be fascinating flora and fauna in the woods and by the lake." "He's always too busy." The bitterness in Eleanor's voice was palpable. "He brought me here because he had to, not because he wanted to." Penelope recognized the pain of abandonment in the girl's words, a pain she herself had felt after her parents' deaths, when distant relatives had grudgingly taken her in until she was old enough to work as a governess. "Perhaps he simply doesn't know how to connect with a young girl," she suggested gently. "Men often find such things challenging." Eleanor's face hardened again. "I don't need him to connect with me. I don't need anyone. I take care of myself." With that declaration, she stormed from the room, leaving Penelope alone with the ghosts of her own childhood losses. Later that evening, as Penelope prepared for bed, a soft knock sounded at her door. She opened it to find Owen standing in the hallway, a book in his hand. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said. "I wanted to check how your first meeting with Eleanor went." Penelope was acutely aware of her state of undress, hair loose around her shoulders, wrapped in only a dressing gown over her nightdress. She kept the door partially closed, shielding herself from view. "As well as could be expected," she replied. "She's testing boundaries, seeing if I'll break like the others." "And will you?" "No." Penelope's voice held firm conviction. "She's not merely being difficult, my lord. She's protecting herself from further loss." Owen sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture that made him seem younger, less composed than his usual self. I've failed her, haven't I? I thought providing governesses and tutors was enough. That she needed education more than affection. She needs both, Penelope said softly. As all children do. I was raised by governesses and tutors myself. My parents were rarely present. His voice held old pain. I thought I was giving her better than I had, with this house, these resources. Children don't want things, my lord. They want people who care for them consistently. He nodded slowly. I see that now. Perhaps too late. It's never too late, Penelope assured him. She's still very young. Thank you, Miss Clarke. He straightened, visibly pulling himself back behind the mask of the confident Marquess. I brought you this, a volume on the local plants and wildlife. I thought it might be useful for your lessons with Eleanor, given her interest in natural philosophy. She accepted the book, their fingers brushing momentarily in the exchange. Even that slight contact sent warmth coursing through her. Good night, my lord. Owen, he corrected gently. When we're alone, at least. That would be improper. A smile touched his lips. You said that when we danced, yet the world didn't end. No, but my employment did, she reminded him. Fair point. He stepped back with a formal bow. Good night, Miss Clarke. Sleep well. As she closed the door, Penelope pressed the book to her chest, trying to calm her racing heart. This house, with its beauty and comfort, with Owen's kindness and Eleanor's vulnerability, was dangerously close to feeling like home already. And that was the most dangerous feeling of all. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm both challenging and rewarding. True to her word, Penelope structured Eleanor's lessons around practical applications of knowledge, botanical expeditions in the gardens, stargazing from the roof terrace, historical discussions framed as the personal stories of real people rather than dry dates and battles. Slowly, Eleanor's resistance began to fade. The girl still tested boundaries, still had days of sullen defiance, but increasingly showed flashes of the bright, curious child beneath the armor of grief. Owen observed the transformation with evident wonder. He began to join them occasionally for afternoon walks or evening readings, his busy schedule somehow finding room for these small interactions. Penelope noted how he watched her with Eleanor, as if studying her methods. One evening, as they sat in the library after Eleanor had gone to bed, he voiced his admiration directly. You've accomplished more in 3 weeks than her previous governesses did in months, he said, pouring her a small glass of sherry. She's actually eager for lessons now. Penelope accepted the glass with a small smile. She was always eager to learn, just not what was being taught. She needs to see the purpose in knowledge. A trait she shares with me, Owen admitted. My tutors despaired of my attention until one wise old gentleman began connecting mathematics to navigation and astronomy. Suddenly I couldn't learn quickly enough. Is that why you travel so extensively? This wanderlust I hear about from Eleanor. He nodded, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. The world is vast and fascinating. There's always something new to discover. His eyes met hers over the rim of his glass. Though lately, I find myself less eager to leave home. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. These evening conversations had become a cherished ritual, intellectual, stimulating, occasionally venturing into personal territory but always maintaining the thin veneer of propriety. Penelope should have ended them weeks ago. Instead, she found herself looking forward to them with an anticipation that frightened her. Will you tell me about Brighton now? Owen asked suddenly. I've waited patiently, but I confess my curiosity remains. Penelope stiffened. There's little to tell that you haven't already surmised. I'd prefer to hear it from you than rely on gossip and conjecture. She set down her glass, gathering her courage. Very well. I was governess to the Harrington children, 3 girls and Thomas, the eldest at 19. He was home from university and paid me certain attentions. Which you discouraged? At first, yes, she admitted. But he was persistent, and I was lonely. The admission cost her, bringing heat to her cheeks. No one had ever spoken to me as he did, called me beautiful, fascinating. I was 23, with no prospects beyond a lifetime of teaching other people's children. Owen's expression remained neutral, free of judgment. What happened? He convinced me to meet him in the gardens one night. Said he wished to speak privately about important matters. Penelope's voice had grown flat, reciting facts to distance herself from the pain. When I arrived, he attempted liberties. I refused. He became angry, claimed I had led him on. We argued. His mother heard the commotion and came to investigate, and naturally believed her son's version of events. He claimed I had pursued him relentlessly, that I was attempting to trap him into marriage. Her hands trembled slightly at the memory. I was dismissed without references, without a character. It took me nearly 6 months to secure another position, and only then because a former school friend took pity on me. Owen's jaw tightened. And Thomas suffered no consequences, I imagine. None. He returned to university with a warning from his father to be more careful about servant girls with ambitions above their station. The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. And so you learned to make yourself invisible, Owen said softly. To fade into the background where you couldn't be noticed or hurt. Penelope looked up, startled by his perception. Yes. Until I asked you to dance. Until you asked me to dance, she echoed, remembering that moment when invisibility had been stripped away. Owen leaned forward, his eyes intent on her face. Penelope, you must know that a sudden commotion in the hallway interrupted whatever he had been about to say. The library door burst open to reveal Mrs. Winters, her typically composed features distressed. My lord. Miss Clarke. It's Miss Eleanor, she's not in her bed. We've searched her room and the nearby corridors, but there's no sign of her. Penelope was on her feet instantly. When was she last seen? Her maid helped her prepare for bed at 9 o'clock, as usual. That was nearly 2 hours ago, Owen said grimly. Organize the staff to search the house and grounds. It's raining, she can't have gone far in this weather. As the housekeeper hurried to obey, Penelope turned to Owen. The roof terrace. We were studying constellations yesterday, and I mentioned that sometimes shooting stars are visible during spring rains. Understanding dawned on his face. She wouldn't have the patience to wait for clear weather. They raced through the house and up the narrow stairs that led to the roof. The rain had intensified, falling in heavy sheets that drenched them as soon as they stepped outside. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by a rumble of thunder. Eleanor! Owen called, his voice nearly lost in the storm. Penelope squinted through the darkness and rain. There! She pointed to a small figure huddled against the parapet, soaked to the skin. They rushed to the child, who looked up with a tear-streaked face. I just wanted to see the shooting stars, she said, teeth chattering with cold. Owen wrapped his coat around her without hesitation. You foolish, brave girl. You could have been struck by lightning. I'm sorry, Eleanor stammered, genuine contrition in her voice. Penelope knelt beside her, heedless of the rain soaking through her dress. We were worried, not angry. You matter to us, Eleanor. Your safety matters. Something in the girl's expression crumbled at these words. She launched herself into Penelope's arms with a sob that seemed torn from her very soul. "Mama used to watch stars with me in India," she cried. "I miss her so much." "I know, dearest. I know." Penelope held her close, her own eyes filling with tears. Owen knelt beside them, enfolding them both in his arms as the rain continued to fall. In that moment, they were not Marquess, Governess, and Ward, but simply three people finding solace in each other's presence. Later, after Eleanor had been dried, warmed, and settled back to sleep, Penelope stood in her own room, still in her damp clothes. The evening's events had shaken something loose within her, some final barrier between herself and this makeshift family. A soft knock at the connecting door revealed Owen, who had changed into dry clothing. "She's finally asleep," he said. "She made me promise you wouldn't be dismissed for taking her stargazing." Despite everything, Penelope smiled. "So I'm to blame for her midnight adventure. Apparently you make learning so enticing that she's willing to risk pneumonia for it." His expression grew serious. "You're soaked through. You should change before you fall ill." "I will. I just needed a moment to." She trailed off, unsure how to articulate the emotional storm within her. Owen stepped closer, his eyes searching her face. "To what?" "To remember my place," she whispered. "Tonight, for a moment on the roof, I forgot who I am. Who you are. What is and isn't possible." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something deeper, more intense. "And if I told you I forget those distinctions every time I'm with you? That I ceased to care about them weeks ago?" "I would say you're being foolish," she replied, though her heart raced at his words. "The world doesn't change simply because we wish it to. Doesn't it?" He reached out slowly, giving her time to retreat, and brushed a damp strand of hair from her face. "I am the Marquess of Falkirk. In this corner of the world, my word is law. If I choose to court my ward's governess, who would dare object?" "Everyone," Penelope said firmly, stepping back from his touch. "Your family, your peers, society at large. And they would be right to do so." Frustration flashed across his features. "Why?" "Because of artificial distinctions of rank and birth? Because tradition says a man in my position must marry for advantage rather than affection? Because a woman in my position has nothing to offer a man in yours except scandal and disgrace?" The words tasted bitter on her tongue. "I've already been accused of setting my cap at one gentleman above my station. I won't confirm those suspicions by allowing myself to develop feelings for you." "Allowing?" Owen repeated, a hint of a smile softening his expression. "Does that mean such feelings already exist, and you're simply refusing to acknowledge them?" Penelope turned away, unwilling to let him see the truth in her eyes. "Good night, Lord Falkirk. Thank you for your concern, but I am perfectly capable of changing into dry clothes without assistance." His sigh carried a mixture of resignation and determination. "This conversation isn't finished, Penelope. But I'll respect your wishes for tonight." The door closed softly behind him, leaving her alone with the dangerous knowledge that her heart had already betrayed her principles. The following weeks brought a noticeable shift in the household dynamics. Eleanor, since the night on the roof, had dropped much of her defensive hostility. She still had moments of stubbornness, still tested boundaries, but now did so with a mischievous gleam rather than bitter defiance. More significantly, she had begun to seek out Owen's company, asking him questions about his travels, requesting his presence at her riding lessons, even convincing him to join their botanical expeditions in the gardens. He responded with evident delight, rearranging his schedule to accommodate her demands for attention. Penelope observed this blossoming relationship with satisfaction tinged with an emotion she refused to acknowledge as jealousy. She had done what she was employed to do, help Eleanor overcome her grief and resistance to learning. If that success meant Owen spent less time in private conversation with Penelope herself, that was surely for the best. Yet she couldn't deny the pang she felt when he announced at breakfast one morning that business required his presence in London for at least a week. "Must you go?" Eleanor asked, her fork pausing midway to her mouth. "We're dissecting frogs tomorrow." Owen chuckled. "As tempting as that sounds, I'm afraid some matters can only be handled in person." His eyes flickered to Penelope. "I trust Miss Clarke will ensure you don't burn down the laboratory in my absence." "Of course," Penelope replied with perfect composure. "Though I make no promises about the state of your specimens when you return." The easy banter masked the tension that had existed between them since that night after the roof incident. Both had been careful to maintain a friendly but professional distance, never referring to the almost confession that had passed between them. After breakfast, as Penelope prepared to take Eleanor to the schoolroom, Owen asked for a private word. They stepped into the small morning room adjacent to the dining room. "I wanted to ask a favor," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "While I'm in London, I plan to call on the Harringtons." Penelope's body went cold. "Why would you do that?" "Because Thomas Harrington has done this before, to at least 3 young women that I know of. It's time someone confronted him and his family with the truth." "No." The word burst from her with surprising force. "Please, don't. It's in the past." Owen studied her face intently. "Is it? Or does it still shape every decision you make? Every wall you build?" She looked away, unable to deny the accusation. "Confronting them won't change what happened. It will only dredge up old gossip, create new scandal." "It might prevent him from harming someone else," Owen argued gently. "And it might help you finally put it behind you." "I have put it behind me." "Have you?" His voice softened. "Then why do you still believe you're unworthy of happiness? Of love?" The direct question struck her like a physical blow. She had never articulated that belief, even to herself, yet he had seen it with painful clarity. "My worthiness or unworthiness isn't the issue," she said finally. "Society has rules, structures that cannot be ignored without consequences. Society's rules were created by people, flawed, prejudiced people protecting their own interests. They can be changed by people as well." He took a step closer. "I'm not asking you for an answer now. But while I'm gone, I want you to consider a question. If those rules and structures didn't exist, what would you want your life to be?" Before she could respond, Eleanor's voice called from the hallway, impatient to begin the day's lessons. Owen squeezed Penelope's hand briefly, then departed, leaving her with a question that would haunt her thoughts long after his carriage had disappeared down the drive. The week of Owen's absence passed with excruciating slowness. Penelope threw herself into Eleanor's education with renewed vigor, determined to keep both their minds occupied. They dissected frogs, with less mess than anticipated, calculated the height of trees using shadows and geometry, and began a translation of a simple French novel that had Eleanor giggling at the romantic mishaps of the heroine. In the evenings, alone in her room, Penelope confronted Owen's parting question. What would she want if society's strictures didn't constrain her? The answer came with frightening ease: Owen. Eleanor. This home. A life filled with learning and laughter and love. But society's strictures did exist. A governess who married above her station would be viewed with suspicion and contempt. Owen would face censure from his peers, perhaps even ostracism from certain circles. And what of Eleanor? How would the girl feel to see her governess transform into her cousin's wife? Would she feel betrayed, abandoned in her education just as she'd begun to trust again? No. The risks were too great, the potential damage too severe. Better to maintain the status quo, to be content with her position, with Eleanor's progress, with the occasional warmth of Owen's smile from across a room. By the time the week ended with no sign of Owen's return, Penelope had convinced herself of the rightness of her decision. When Mrs. Winters informed her that Lord Falkirk had sent word he would be delayed another few days, she accepted the news with outward calm, even as disappointment twisted in her chest. 2 days later, as Penelope supervised Eleanor's piano practice, Mrs. Winters appeared at the schoolroom door, her expression unusually troubled. "Miss Clarke, there's a situation that requires your attention." "What kind of situation?" Penelope asked, immediately concerned. "A visitor." In the blue drawing room. The housekeeper's lips pressed into a thin line. "A young woman asking specifically for you." Penelope frowned. "For me? I can't imagine who would call on me here. She says her name is Miss Charlotte Harrington." The name sent a shock through Penelope's system. Charlotte Harrington, Thomas's youngest sister, who had been only 10 years old when Penelope left the family in disgrace. "I see." Penelope turned to Eleanor. "Continue practicing that passage. I'll return shortly." Her mind raced as she followed Mrs. Winters downstairs. Why would Charlotte seek her out after all this time? Had Owen's visit to London somehow prompted this unexpected call? The blue drawing room held a single occupant, a slender young woman of perhaps 16, dressed in a traveling costume that showed signs of hasty packing and long journeys. Charlotte had grown from a child into a young woman, but her features were unmistakable. "Miss Harrington," Penelope said, closing the door behind her. "This is unexpected." Charlotte rose, her expression a mixture of determination and uncertainty. "Miss Clarke. Thank you for agreeing to see me." "Of course. Please, sit." Penelope took a seat across from her, noting the girl's nervous demeanor. "May I ask how you found me?" "Lord Falkirk," Charlotte replied simply. "He called on my parents last week." There was quite a scene. Penelope's heart sank. "I asked him not to interfere." "I'm glad he did." Charlotte's voice strengthened. "He said things that needed saying, things I've known were true but had no one to confirm them." She leaned forward earnestly. "Miss Clarke, I need to apologize to you for what my brother did. For what my family did." The unexpected apology left Penelope momentarily speechless. "That's very kind, but unnecessary. You were just a child." "I'm not a child now." Charlotte's chin lifted in a gesture of defiance that reminded Penelope painfully of Eleanor. "And Thomas hasn't changed. 2 weeks ago, I caught him attempting to force himself on our new lady's maid. When I confronted him, he laughed and said no one would believe a servant over the air." Rage flashed through Penelope, hot and unexpected. "Did he hurt her?" "No, I arrived in time to prevent it." "But it made me realize, this wasn't the first time, was it? He did the same to you, and my parents chose to believe him rather than seek the truth." Tears welled in Charlotte's eyes. "When Lord Falkirk came, he spoke of patterns of behavior, of Thomas's history at university, things my parents have deliberately ignored for years." Penelope's mind whirled with implications. "Charlotte, does your family know you're here?" The girl's expression hardened. "No. After Lord Falkirk left, my father forbade any mention of the matter. My mother wept and said our family name had been insulted. But I couldn't let it rest, not when I knew the truth." She reached into her reticule and withdrew a folded paper. "I brought something for you." Penelope accepted the paper with trembling fingers. Unfolding it, she found herself looking at a letter written in elegant hand on Harrington family stationery. "To whom it may concern, I, Charlotte Harrington, daughter of Sir William Harrington, do hereby attest that Miss Penelope Clarke served our family with honor and integrity during her employment as governess. Her departure from our household was the result of false accusations made by my brother, Thomas Harrington, who has since demonstrated a pattern of similar behavior toward other young women in vulnerable positions. Miss Clarke's character and conduct were beyond reproach, and any suggestion to the contrary is both false and malicious. This statement is made freely and of my own volition, in the interest of justice and truth." Charlotte and Harrington tears blurred Penelope's vision as she read the letter that vindicated her after years of silent shame. "Charlotte, this is... I don't know what to say." "Say you'll forgive my family's treatment of you," Charlotte replied simply. "And perhaps that you'll help me." "Help you? How?" The girl's composure faltered slightly. "I've run away. I couldn't stay in that house, with those lies. I have some money saved, but not enough to establish myself independently. Lord Falkirk suggested that you might. Understanding dawned. He suggested you come to me for assistance." Charlotte nodded. "He said you would understand my position better than most. That you might help me find a situation as a governess or companion." Penelope stared at this brave, desperate girl who had risked everything for truth and justice. Who had, in essence, done exactly what Penelope herself had failed to do, stand up against powerful men who abused their position. Before she could respond, the drawing-room door opened to reveal Owen, travel-worn and weary but with eyes that immediately sought Penelope's. "I see Miss Harrington found you safely," he said. "Excellent." Penelope rose, emotions warring within her, gratitude for his intervention, anger at his disregard for her wishes, confusion about Charlotte's presence. "Lord Falkirk, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow. I received Miss Harrington's message that she intended to visit and thought it best to return immediately." He stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind him. "I apologize for the deception, but I felt it important that you two speak privately before I arrived." Charlotte looked between them, clearly sensing the tension. "I should perhaps give you a moment alone." "No need," Penelope said quickly. "Lord Falkirk and I have no private matters to discuss. Your situation, however, requires immediate attention." She turned to Owen. "I assume you had some plan in mind when you directed Miss Harrington here." His expression remained calm despite her evident displeasure. "I thought she might benefit from Eleanor's companionship and your guidance. At 16, she's too old for a traditional governess but might serve well as a kind of junior teacher's assistant. With your approval, of course." The logical solution caught Penelope off guard. Charlotte was indeed at an awkward age, too old for schoolroom lessons, too young for independence. And Eleanor would benefit from female companionship closer to her own age. What of Miss Harrington's parents? Surely they'll come looking for her. "I've taken the liberty of writing to Sir William," Owen replied. "I explained that his daughter is safe and well supervised, but has requested time away from home to consider her future options. I also mentioned that any attempt to force her return might result in certain revelations becoming public knowledge." Charlotte's eyes widened. "You blackmailed my father." "I merely pointed out the potential consequences of his actions," Owen corrected with a slight smile. "Sir William is nothing if not practical. He'll allow you this freedom rather than risk further scandal." Penelope studied Owen's face, seeing beyond the confident exterior to the genuine concern beneath. He had done all this, confronted the Harringtons, orchestrated Charlotte's safe passage to Falkirk Manor, secured her future position without any guarantee that Penelope would approve or cooperate. He had fought for justice on her behalf when she had been too afraid to fight for herself. "Miss Harrington," Penelope said finally, "I would be honored to have your assistance with Eleanor's education. And I believe you'll find Falkirk Manor a safe haven while you consider your future path." Relief washed over Charlotte's face. "Thank you, Miss Clarke. I promise I won't be a burden." "Not a burden," Penelope corrected gently. "An asset." After arranging for Charlotte to be shown to a guest room and provided with refreshment, Penelope found herself alone with Owen in the drawing room. The tension between them was palpable. "You went against my explicit wishes," she said quietly. "I asked you not to confront the Harringtons." "Yes," he admitted without apology. "Because sometimes healing requires lancing the wound first." "You deserved vindication, Penelope. You deserved the truth to be acknowledged. It wasn't your place to decide that for me." "Perhaps not." His expression softened. "But someone needed to stand up for you when you wouldn't stand up for yourself. Just as you've stood up for Eleanor. For Charlotte." The comparison struck her forcefully. Had she been so fiercely protective of others while neglecting her own well-being? Had her desire to avoid conflict, to remain invisible, become a prison rather than protection? "The letter Charlotte brought," she said slowly, "it changes nothing about my situation here." "Doesn't it?" Owen took a step closer. "It proves your innocence. It confirms what I already knew, that you are a woman of impeccable character who was wronged by those with power over her. And yet I remain a governess, and you remain a marquess." The words held less conviction than they might have days ago. Titles. Positions. Masks we wear. Another step brought him close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes. "When I'm with you, Penelope, I'm not a marquess. I'm simply a man who has found something precious and unexpected." Her heart thundered in her chest. "And what is that?" "A woman who sees me as I am, not as my title dictates. A woman who challenges my thinking, who makes me laugh, who cares for my ward with genuine affection rather than dutiful obligation." His voice dropped lower. "A woman I've fallen deeply, irrevocably in love with." The declaration hung in the air between them, both terrifying and exhilarating in its simplicity. "Owen," she whispered, his name a plea for reason. "The consequences will be navigated together," he finished firmly. "I've spent 2 weeks in London considering every possible objection, every potential obstacle. None of them matter compared to the prospect of losing you. People will talk. People always talk. Let them. Your family will come to love you as I do, once they know you. Eleanor already adores you and would be overjoyed to call you cousin." Penelope found herself running out of objections, yet one remained, the deepest fear she had carried since Brighton. What if I'm not worthy of what you're offering?" Understanding filled his eyes. He reached out slowly, taking her hands in his. "That's the false belief that's been poisoning your happiness all along, isn't it? That you somehow deserved what happened in Brighton. That you are unworthy of love and respect because of your station in life." Tears welled in her eyes as he named the dark thought that had haunted her for years. "Yes." "Then let me be absolutely clear." His hands tightened around hers. "You are worthy, Penelope Clarke. Of love. Of respect. Of every happiness this world can offer. Not because of your position or lack thereof, but because of who you are." The conviction in his voice, the warmth in his eyes, broke something inside her, some final barrier between fear and hope. "I'm terrified," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Not of scandal or gossip, but of believing you. Of hoping. Then be terrified, he said simply. But be terrified with me, by my side, where I can remind you every day of your worth. Before she could respond, the drawing-room door burst open to reveal Eleanor, breathless with excitement. Is it true? She demanded without preamble. Mrs. Winters says you've brought a girl to be my companion. And that, she stopped abruptly, taking in the scene before her, Owen and Penelope standing close together, hands clasped, faces intimate with emotion. A slow smile spread across Eleanor's face. Oh. Are you finally going to marry Miss Clarke? I've been hoping you would for ages. Owen's startled laugh broke the tension. Have you indeed? And why is that? Eleanor rolled her eyes with the dramatic exasperation only a 12-year-old could muster. Because you both look at each other when you think no one's watching. And because Miss Clarke makes you laugh, and you make her blush. And because we could be a proper family then. The simple, childish logic struck Penelope with unexpected force. A proper family. The thing Eleanor had lost in India. The thing Penelope herself had lost when her parents died. The thing Owen had never truly had with his distant, aristocratic parents. Eleanor, Penelope said gently, even if, and it's a very large if, your cousin and I were to marry, there would be consequences. Society might not approve. Some people might be unkind. Eleanor lifted her chin defiantly. So? People were unkind when my parents died. They whispered about the poor little orphan when they thought I couldn't hear. Being afraid of unkindness is silly if it keeps you from being happy. Out of the mouths of babes, Penelope thought with wonder. All her adult fears and concerns, dismissed with childish wisdom. Well? Eleanor prompted impatiently. Are you going to marry him or not? Owen's eyes danced with amusement and something deeper, more profound. That depends entirely on whether Miss Clarke will have me. I've made my feelings clear, but she has yet to give me her answer. Both pairs of eyes turned to Penelope expectantly. In that moment, standing between the man she loved and the child who had become so dear to her, the choice that had seemed impossible now appeared inevitable. Yes, she said simply. If you're certain it's what you want, then yes. Owen's face transformed with joy. He lifted her hands to his lips, pressing a fervent kiss to her knuckles. Nothing has ever been more certain. Eleanor clapped her hands in delight. Wonderful. Can I tell Charlotte? Is she to live with us permanently? Will there be a grand wedding? Can I be bridesmaid? One question at a time, Owen laughed. And perhaps give us a moment of privacy first. With a knowing grin, Eleanor skipped from the room, already calling for Mrs. Winters to share the news. Alone once more, Owen drew Penelope into his arms. Are you sure? Truly sure. She looked up into his beloved face, seeing there all the promises of a future she had never dared imagine. I'm sure that I love you. The rest, we'll face together. His arms tightened around her. That's all I need to hear. When his lips finally met hers, Penelope felt the last shadows of Brighton fade away, replaced by the bright certainty of belonging. Of being seen, truly seen, by the man who loved her not despite her station but because of the woman she had become through all her trials and triumphs. The governess who had thought herself invisible had finally stepped into the light. 6 months later, as autumn gilded the grounds of Falkirk Manor, Penelope stood before a mirror in what was now her dressing room, scarcely recognizing the woman who looked back at her. Gone was the plain governess in her modest brown dresses. In her place stood the Marchioness of Falkirk, dressed in ivory silk for her wedding breakfast. The ceremony itself had been small but perfect, family and close friends gathered in the manor's ancient chapel. Owen's mother, initially skeptical, had been won over by Penelope's quiet dignity and obvious love for both her son and Eleanor. The few society matrons who had sniffed disapprovingly at the match found themselves subtly but firmly excluded from the celebration. A soft knock at the door preceded Eleanor and Charlotte, both radiant in matching blue gowns. "Are you ready?" Eleanor asked excitedly. "Everyone's waiting, and Cousin Owen looks like he might expire from happiness." Penelope smiled at her step-cousin, now legally her ward, alongside Charlotte, who had been formally placed under the Falkirk's guardianship. "I'm ready." As she descended the grand staircase to where Owen waited, hand extended toward her, Penelope marveled at how completely her life had transformed in the span of a year. From invisible governess to beloved wife. From solitary existence to the heart of a family created through choice rather than convention. "Happy?" Owen murmured as she reached his side. "Beyond measure," she replied truthfully. Together they entered the great hall where their guests awaited. As Owen led her to the center of the room for their first dance as husband and wife, Penelope remembered another first dance, in a London ballroom, when a governess who thought herself invisible had first been truly seen. The music began, and as they moved together in perfect harmony, Penelope knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true place in the world, not defined by society's rules or past mistakes, but by the love that had finally taught her to see herself as worthy of every happiness.